let's head into chat. So today we're talking about how we can learn from hard moments. Let me know an example of a hard moment in your week. And if you've not listened to the podcast so far this week, which is always absolutely fine, the distinction we make between a hard moment and a knotty moment, which might sound like a distinction you didn't know you needed, but we found it quite helpful. So we described knotty moments in your squiggly careers as those big moments of challenge. So things like maybe you're making a really big career change, maybe you're going through a restructure or redundancy. What we're talking about here with these hard moments are you had a hard meeting, you had a hard conversation, something didn't quite go in the way that you'd anticipated, but it's quite in the moment, in that day or in that week. It might be reoccurring, but it's not sort of those big career knotty moments. So it'd be good to get some examples from all of you when you're thinking about hard moments in your week or in your days. Just like some examples, could be from your current role, could be from previous roles. Like, what does that look and feel like for you? Told your boss you've got an interview for another role. Yeah, really good example, quite a hard conversation to have. You perhaps don't know how someone's going to respond to that. Yeah, brilliant one. Receiving feedback you don't expect. So you're maybe not ready for it, or maybe you thought the feedback was just going to be different. So it surprised you. Steve, always honest, raised a concern with somebody and got a bit of an ear bashing for it. So you're getting a different response to the one that you'd anticipated. Oh, Sophie, you forgot 1 point out of 3 in the introduction of a big event, but don't forget, you're the only person who knew that you forgot that 1 point. Maybe one other person if you told someone beforehand, but I'm sure that will never be as bad as you think it is. And obviously it's the thing you remember. You did all that good stuff and you're like, but I forgot that 1 point. Oh, damn it. Difficult thing. Okay, yeah, interesting, Sam. You're thinking about what next, but you're more of a thinker than a doer, and you feel like you're kind of spiraling. So that's more about a mindset, hard moment, maybe. Okay. Alison, I really like that. Tell someone they need to do something better, they just look really cheesed off. Yeah, okay. So you're thinking, okay, well, that's not maybe landed in the way that I wanted. Is it going to make the difference that I'd hoped? Tell someone they need to do something better. That's interesting, Claire. We're going to talk a bit about being surprised versus anticipating hard moments. So you're saying, actually, I knew it was coming. So actually, before we even started, I knew we didn't agree. So I knew it was going to be hard. Emma, you were asked for feedback, you gave the feedback, you got a bad response to that feedback, and they responded quite aggressively. Interesting. Our article, I will mention it now, I can't give you the link because they work on US time. Our article on feedback in HBR comes out today, so look out for that later today, tomorrow. Might be useful. I hope that'll be a really useful one for people to share in organizations. We're doing quite a lot of work on feedback at the moment, trying to make it practical, useful, a bit more every day. Mara, somebody was telling you how to run your team. Always quite tricky, and you struggled to stay calm, but it sounds like you maybe did stay calm, so well done you. Right, I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Okay, and we're going to start, and I have asked for permission, so I'm not just kind of borrowing Helen here. We're going to start with one of Helen's hard moments that actually prompted the podcast episode. So Helen she was in a conversation with a potential client, and this person said to her, basically, he doesn't buy squiggly, and it was a guy. So he doesn't buy squiggly, and some of his exact words that kind of really stuck with Helen were, senior leaders wouldn't say squiggly. Yeah, I sort of get what this is, but not for me, essentially. Now, that doesn't happen very often now. It happened actually quite a lot when we first started working on squiggly careers. But this person was quite difficult, quite confrontational, and was essentially sort of going, I don't buy your kind of almost the context and the frame for what you do. So that's a hard moment for Helen that she hadn't anticipated. She doesn't experience very often. And she came away thinking, okay, well, what can I learn from that? So let me know, like, how could we help Helen with a bit of sort of, let's imagine now we are all taking a coaching approach and mentoring Helen, and she's described that situation to us. What might be helpful for Helen? What advice might we give her? What reassurance could we give her? Let's do a bit of coaching crowdsourcing from all of the wisdom that we've got in PodPlus. Oh, thanks for sharing that, Sophie, on feedback. Green, yeah, this is just one person's perspective. Great. We'll come on to perspective taking. Reminding somebody about different data points, to Lucy's point there. So can you go off and go, well, that's one data point, but if you look at 9 more data points, it would tell you a very different story. So that's really useful. So perspective or lens or frames, it's one person's view. How could you test the assumption? That's a great coaching question, Hayley. I love that. Really good open coaching question. What experiences make them think that? Sophie, yeah. Steve, yeah, exactly. It potentially is a challenge to be expected. So though you might be surprised, it's still quite different to the way that lots of organizations have worked for a very long time. And so kind of almost what you've done there is sort of been very pragmatic, very open about how you respond to that. Try to understand what's behind the statement. Yeah. How could you use the perspective to help you? That's a great coaching question there from Ali as well. Yeah, well, what can you learn from that perspective? Rather than thinking, well, I disagree, or that's unhelpful, or getting defensive. So I think what happened to Helen when she described it to me, and she did describe it to me pretty soon after, because I think she'd felt under quite a lot of challenge in that conversation, was she felt that she lost her confidence, and that she also kind of didn't show up in the way that she would have liked to. So that's sort of what we're trying to sort of get to. These hard moments will happen, but how do you make sure you don't get defensive? How do you stay open? How do you stay confident? And of course, it's hard to not get defensive. Some empathy, yeah, that's nice, Claire. Yeah, you don't have time to think about a response. Helen is actually very good on the spot, much better than I am on the spot. She's very spontaneous. I know she would have been better in that conversation than she gives herself credit for. So that's also something that's really helpful. Her talking to me quite quickly about it, and because she listens to me most of the time, I actually said to her, you're giving yourself a hard time. I know you would have done a good job. Like, I know that you might not have been as amazingly slick as you might normally be, but I know you will have still been confident and calm, and you always show up really well on the spot. So I was sort of reminding her of other examples. And let me know now, using the annotations, when you think about hard moments, do you tend to think of them, actually I will do a third option just in case, as ones that you can anticipate, ones that are a surprise, or do you think they're actually a mix of both? Because when we were going through this as a podcast, lots of the hard moments ended up feeling like a surprise. They ended up like, oh, if I'd have known, I would have actually been okay. So if Helen had known that conversation was coming, she was like, I'd have been fine. But when you're suddenly put on the spot, when you've not anticipated it, you're reacting in the moment, it feels much harder. But some of you saying a mix. Some of you saying surprise. Elaine, yeah. I've had a manager who said this. I swear they teach this on leadership training. They encourage managers and leaders and directors to say, help me understand this. I had a boss at Sainsbury's, and her default was, okay, that's interesting, Sarah. Tell me a bit more about that. And her tell me a bit more about that was always basically, I either hadn't been clear, or she didn't get it, or she wasn't convinced. And to Claire's point there, it took me a little while to just adjust to that. I was like, why is she asking me to tell her a bit more? Is it because I've done a bad job? Is she just genuinely interested? Do I need to go into more detail? Should I repeat what I've just said? So sometimes I think you do find people have these sort of default responses. And I think it's okay to respond to that question with a question. Okay, so, what would be most useful for you? Asking that kind of question. Is it that you need to be more clear? Is it that they've got a specific challenge in mind? Better to hear the challenge, because then you can respond to the challenge, versus tell me a bit more about that. I'm like, tell me a bit more about what? So sometimes it is okay to also go back and go, well, what would be useful? The question, Sam, is, do you anticipate hard moments? Are they a surprise, or are they a mix? So loads of people saying they're a mix. Some people saying, yeah, they tend to be more of a surprise. I tend to be loads better when I can anticipate something. I know there are things that I find hard, and then I can really work on them in a very sort of grown-up, adult way, where you've kind of putting learning first. Surprised, I have to work much, much harder on. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, help me understand why you can't do that. You've got to be careful, because I do think some of those questions can come across as passive aggressive. So it depends a bit on the intent and the tone, clearly, with those kind of questions. They're not bad questions, but we can all sense in a room whether someone really means help me understand, or whether they're actually just going, this is unacceptable. Okay, first thought for all of you then. When we are thinking about in these hard moments, what can we do in the moment? It is hard when we are taken by surprise. You are in that hard moment. You're getting that feedback you didn't expect. You're having a conversation that is not going as planned. I think one thing that is really useful is to think about one word that represents how you would like to show up in those spontaneously hard moments that you hadn't expected. So my word was open, because when I thought about lots of my hard moments and I think about my response, my typical reaction to those hard moments, as somebody who's quite introverted, I'm much more likely to shut down, to kind of close down, to withdraw, and even sometimes to get angry. But I've definitely got the ability in my personality to get angry. Helen went with calm. What else? What are the words? What's the kind of one word? We've got curious. I really like curious. That's a great way to think about how do you want to show up. Curious, in control. Yeah, nice. Dignified, Lucinda, I like that. Composed from Tiffany, lovely. Active listener. Great from Steve there. Because when you have this word, what it will then help you with, unflappable, love that, Karine. Unfrozen from Louise. That to me is very kind of evocative of exactly what you're trying to do, not being like rabbit in headlights, which I can also really associate with. So yeah, maybe you're trying to be wise, calm, in control. Once you sort of have that word in mind, it's a bit of a shortcut for your brain to remind you about how you want to behave. So what might you do? So let's say for me, again, let's do a bit of group coaching. If I want to stay open in a hard moment I'd not anticipated, what might I do? Let me know in chat. Like, how would that show up? How would that open behavior show up? What would you see from me? What would you hear from me? What's the connection between how I want to show up and then what that would look like in practice? What ideas have you got for me? Yeah, brilliant. So there's something about your body language. If I sort of start to sort of do that, especially if I'm in a room, you're literally kind of closing down. So body language, not leaning out of the conversation. Great, Claire. Yeah, I think the most obvious one is asking open, curious questions. Marnie, I love that build there of curious. Great from Lucy there. Bit of press pause, like give yourself permission to have time to think. Yeah. So press pause. Breathe, drop your shoulders. That's really nice from Claire there. Again, a very practical thing of being like, sort of the press pause. What might that look like? Just sort of drop your shoulders, just sort of take a breath. I almost sort of often tell myself, challenge myself to say, oh, I want to stay really open in this moment. I just want to stay really open. That's my single job to do. Great, Frank, love that. Just smile. So maybe you're thinking, this is a disaster, or this is going really badly, but maybe you actually sort of force yourself to sort of go, okay, yeah, that's, like you kind of really lean into it by smiling, by breathing, maybe slowing yourself down. I find if I slow myself down, I stay very calm. We've all got the ability to sort of play around a bit with things like pace, like the pace of our communication. So sort of slow down a little bit. I love that from Lucy as well. Yeah, maybe just write a few notes. Just jot. If I'm thinking, okay, let's imagine that scenario now where Helen's talking to this person who's going squiggly is a bad idea. Maybe you sort of just start to think, okay, I'm just going to write down a few things that this person is saying so that I can actually really get a feel for, well, what are they actually telling me? Because then we can start to make our own assumptions and associations. Maybe what they're actually saying is some quite useful stuff that you might miss if you then start to kind of really shut down or if you kind of really close. I always think when you're in these hard moments, we've got to, rather than putting lots of pressure on ourselves, I think release that pressure from yourself and try and just expect one thing. So I think, we can't be perfect in these moments. There's no way I'm slowing down, asking open, curious questions, have brilliant body language, pausing and showing up as my absolute incredible Sarah at her best. That's okay, because we're all human. But what I can do is ask open, curious questions. If I want to be open, I can ask open, curious questions. Yeah, it's quite good advice for parenting, Joe. You're right. And so I think about the one thing. I only ever go for one thing. What's the one behavior that links to that word that demonstrates how you want to show up? And it might not be open. I've just used that as an example. If it's calm, what's the one behavior? If it's curious, what's the one behavior? So connect the how you want to show up with just one action that you would take in those hard moments. Because essentially what you do there is you create a heuristic for your brain. And all that is a shortcut. Our brains love shortcuts. And I think shortcuts are a great way for us to learn sort of in the moment, to remind ourselves. Shortcuts are sort of sticky. And so if I just think something's difficult, open, ask curious questions, I can remember that. And then that's sort of it. That's all I ever try to do in those hard moments that take me by surprise. I actually have higher expectations of myself when I'm anticipating the hard moment. Because if I know it's coming, I think I've got a bit more capacity, essentially, to learn and to try out more things. But if you weren't expecting it, just hold yourself to account for one behavior. And then afterwards, just think, was I open? Did I ask open, curious questions? And did that show up with open, curious questions? And if you did that, you're doing a brilliant job. That's all you sort of should expect of yourself. Corinne, yeah, great question for the group. Any views on saying I wasn't expecting that? Personally, I think it is okay to signal that you're surprised. Depends on the context. So you might say, oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't considered that perspective. Well, that's interesting. I hadn't considered that point of view. Talk to me a bit more about ... I think I might signal that's a new perspective to me, or that's interesting, I hadn't considered it. And then I would sort of join it up with a question. But I wouldn't do it all of the time. I think it would depend on who I was talking to and whether that kind of felt okay to do. Great. Let's talk about a few ideas for action as well after the moment. 2 of these have worked particularly well for me in the last 2 weeks. So we're practicing what we preach. The first one, which you all suggested as a great idea for Helen, which is exactly what she did in that moment, is the perspective playback. If you are somebody who is prone to spiraling, being your own worst critic, finds it hard to maybe zoom out sometimes when things have felt hard, get some perspective playback. I do think you need perspective playback from someone who knows you well, because they can remind you of when you're at your best. They can remind you of how you normally show up. And also, they need to be somebody you trust, because it's got to feel real. It's got to feel authentic. So there's no point as doing sort of sweeping statements about going, oh yeah, but you're great. That actually doesn't tend to help us that much. And I've had this situation where things have felt hard, and then someone might just generally go, oh yeah, but you're really, you're brilliant. You've got nothing to worry about. And I'm like, oh no, but I am worried about it. So that you need someone who can be specific and who you think will also just help you to sort of see the wood from the trees. So who can give you that perspective playback? I would also encourage you to get it quickly. The thing that I think Helen did so well in that hard moment was talk to me very quickly. So I'm talking get some perspective playback same day, because we're talking here about hard moments in a day, hard moments in a week. You don't want them to sort of seep into the rest of your week or the rest of your month, or to preoccupy headspace that would be more helpful spent somewhere else. And so I actually do think there's a sort of speed imperative here, like quickly share with someone else, get some perspective playback. You don't need to do it in sort of real time. You could do it. I think Helen actually left me a voice note, and I think I left her a voice note back. And then I think we actually had a chat at kind of some point about other stuff, and we mentioned it. And the brilliant thing was then she sort of moved on quite quickly, / then put a post on LinkedIn about it. But, that's very specific to us and what we do. But perspective playback, really useful. This second one is my favorite idea for action because it's just been very helpful for me, which is choose your ending. So sometimes when you've had a hard moment, it feels quite out of your control. So that moment might feel like it's gone in a very different direction. It kind of feels out of your control. But often there is an opportunity to choose your ending, to then think, okay, so what am I going to do now to sort of put myself back in control a bit? And that might look like an email to somebody saying thank you. It might look like actually something you kind of do for yourself in terms of writing down some learning. It might look like following up with that person. So don't see the hard moment as the full stop. See it as a kind of ... and then just think, is there anything else I want to do so that I feel like I'm choosing my ending here? So sort of choose your ending. So I've had this a few times where maybe people have said no. Maybe they said no to something that I've asked. And I was sort of hoping they were going to say yes, and for whatever reason they've not. And you sort of think, oh, that would leave me feeling quite disappointed. But okay, actually, no, do you know what? I'm going to go back to them and just sort of say thank you. Or maybe it's about you've had some feedback, and then again, you choose your ending. It's sort of a bit about taking control back from something that often has felt quite out of your control. So I found that really helpful. And then the last thing is about rehearsing your response. Now, I don't think some of these hard moments are identical, but I think your experience of the hard moment can be quite similar. So you have a hard moment. Often we have a bit of a default as to, oh, I'm somebody who maybe shuts down, probably doesn't overtly get defensive, but then afterwards get quite angry. That's my sort of response. People have quite different responses. Sometimes in hard moments, it reinforces loads of our confidence gremlins. And so actually it's about, we really lose our self-belief. It sort of really impacts kind of how we feel about ourselves and our confidence for the rest of that day or the rest of that week. So though that exact hard moment might not happen in exactly the same way, what you can just do is think, if I had something similar, what might I do next time? So one of the things for me, for example, is when we do workshops a bit like this, but for companies, so we're doing big company programs, it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally you get somebody in the group who's very disruptive. You know, somebody who sort of loves to debate things and is often, I think, a little bit deliberately difficult. So they might actually say, yeah, that's the I don't believe in squiggly careers type statement. I was once in a room doing a program for a company about like learning mindset, growth mindset. And I reckon I was 5 minutes in, someone put their hand up and I was like, oh, okay, yeah. Like, what do you want to say? And this person was like, I fundamentally disagree with growth mindset. And I was thinking, oh, this is going to be a long day for you. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's quite an unusual thing to happen. And that's quite a hard moment because you're put on the spot. You've not anticipated it. But I've had sort of enough experience now of going, okay, what do you do if somebody in a group situation says that they've got a completely different point of view? And that's where I go to. Be open, ask open, curious questions. My other sort of tool or tactic in that moment is to not feel like it's my job to solve, but to involve the group. So I will probably say, oh, that's really interesting. Perhaps you could talk to us a bit about like how you got to that point of view. And then I might ask some other people in the group to sort of share their points of view or their perspective. And then that kind of usually is a nice segue to them being able to keep going. Now, my job there is not to try and win. I've sort of let go of the idea of going, you're not trying to win against that person, and you're not necessarily trying to change their mind. But what you are trying to do is give them the opportunity to be heard and to not feel like you can't involve other people in that conversation. So I've sort of rehearsed that enough that I know now with that anticipated hard moment, I've got a default response because it's about practice. Like anything, if we don't practice it, it is very hard to do something for the first time. But I've practiced that enough now that if something like that happens, I've got a good way of responding, staying very calm. I know how I'm going to get through that moment. Am I still sweating in that moment and feeling quite tense and finding it hard? Of course. But a few people have actually said to me before, oh, you stayed very calm there. And I'm thinking, well, okay, well, I'm glad that's how it felt for everybody. But, you know, I'm still sort of feeling a little bit tense. But I've rehearsed that response enough. I've practiced enough that it becomes really helpful. You like turning it into a competition. I do honestly think with these things, with hard moments, it's whatever works for you. But don't see those hard moments as defining of your day or defining of your week. I think that's what can happen when we sort of let it magnify in our mind. We have these hard moments. think about what can we learn? How can it help us to get better? Almost be quite selfish about them. Just see those hard moments and go, right, okay, what can I learn? How can I be better? What would I do differently next time? Who could help me get some perspective playback? And then we sort of move on, really kind of having this overall kind of learning mindset. Okay. So last thing, just wanted to share with you, and I think I've got a link ready for you as well. I do think this is a really good quote by Glennon Doyle here, where she says, these things will be hard to do, but you can do hard things. And that she said that at the start, actually just pre-pandemic. And then it became a real sort of rallying cry, I think, over the past kind of couple of years during the pandemic. And she does have a podcast called We Can Do Hard Things, which I've listened to the odd episode. The one that I really liked was with Michelle Obama, of all people. You're like, just Michelle Obama. But Michelle Obama is really interesting. She's got a really interesting life story. Obviously, she's had insights into fascinating things during her experiences. So if you only listen to one episode, that's kind of the one for me. But I do think we should remind ourselves of this. We can do hard things. Because I see it time and time again with people that we all have more potential than we give ourselves credit for. So yes, you'll have hard moments. No, they won't go away. But what we can all do, because you're all here today spending some time thinking about it, we can be the ones that really learn from it. We can be the ones that get even better as a result. And then, more opportunities come your way. You feel better. You feel more confident about your capability as a result. And then you can help other people with those hard moments too. So always remember, these are universal. Yesterday, I was on the phone to somebody who is in a very, very senior role, and she just was talking to me about a CEO role. So she's in a very, very senior job, and she was within 2 minutes, she was talking to me about a hard thing. And when you sometimes think, surely that person doesn't have hard things anymore because they're so good, they're such a brilliant leader. And she was like, oh, this thing's really hard. I was like, oh, okay, it's not going anywhere, but we can do hard things. And actually, I was a bit of a perspective playback for her, because I was then WhatsApping her as she disappeared into a tunnel going, like, I have got no doubt you can do these things. Like, almost like, but because I was thinking about we can do hard things. So I was actually giving her a bit of perspective playback and just reminding her that she's as brilliant as I know that she is. Yeah, I think, do you know what, actually, Jo, it's a really good point. Their podcast isn't for me, actually. The Dynamics of Three People, I think, is a really interesting one. It's probably just not quite practical enough for me, or quite, it's not based on enough research. But if you actually enjoy people more in conversation, I think it's brilliant. And I do think that one episode of Michelle Obama is worth checking out. So we're going to leave it there for today. I hope that's been helpful. As always, please use the pod sheets, the pod notes. Please let us know if you've got any topics that you would like us to cover. And then last thing I wanted to mention today is, I don't know if you have seen, we have mentioned it in a previous PodPlus, we've now got a video book for the Squiggly Career. And the people who made that video book, a production company over in LA, which sounds so much more glamorous than it is. We did not get to go to LA to do that video book. They have offered us a number of free copies to give out to communities. If anybody would like a free copy of the Squiggly Career video book, if you could email me, sarah@amazingif.com. And we're going to do a sort of mass request to the production company for however many we want. So if you would like a Squiggly Career video book, just email me, sarah@amazingif.com, and we'll do our best to make sure that everybody in PodPlus who wants one can have one. Thank you so much, everyone. Brilliant to have you all here. As always, thank you for all of your people helping people that we saw in action, and hope to see you again next week. So glad you were here, Marnie, for the live connections. So much wisdom in our groups.